Good evening and welcome to the July 5th regular meeting of the San Ramon Planning Commission. We're calling this meeting to order at 7:01. Can the recording secretary please conduct our roll call?
Commissioner Edwards,
Present.
Commissioner Marks,
Here.
Commissioner Wallace,
I'm here.
Vice Chair Alpert,
Here.
Chair Kuznick.
Yes, here. All right, item 3, Pledge of Allegiance. If you will join me in our Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on in our agenda, we get to item 4.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to request the indulgence of the Planning Commission to rearrange the agenda slightly. It occurs to me that Commissioner Kuznick has never had a chance to chair a full meeting in the chambers. And so rather than do the normal order and have a new chair take over and run the meeting, I'd like to propose that we move it to the end of the agenda tonight after the study session items, item 13. So I'll make a motion to adjust the agenda.
All right, there is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner Edwards, I believe, is the second. All right, we're going to practice our voting here. So we have a motion to rearrange the agenda, item 4 going to the end of the agenda list.
Mover, Vice Chair Alpert,
Aye.
Seconder, Commissioner Edwards,
Aye.
Commissioner Marks,
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace,
Aye.
Chair Kuznick.
Aye. So the motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, I guess we are moving on to item 5, public comments or written communications. If you wish to speak under public comment, please fill out a speaker card and provide it to our Planning Commission clerk. If you are participating remotely, you may click on the raise your hand button on your computer or the *9 on your telephone to request to speak when public comment is being taken. At this time, members of the public may address the Planning Commission on any item not already on tonight's agenda. So, Madam Recording Secretary, you
Thank you. We received one late written communication from Ralph Ballard. It's part of the public record and was provided to the commission prior to the meeting. We have not received any speaker cards on items not on tonight's agenda. And I'll check the. We do not have any hands raised in the audience.
All right, seeing no speakers and having none listed, we will move on to, we will close the public comment on items not on the agenda. All right, moving on to item 6, additions and revisions. There are none. Well, we already did it. Item 7, the consent calendar. There are no items. Moving on to item 8, the approval of minutes, item 8.1, minutes from the June 7th, 2022 regular Planning Commission meeting. So commissioners, is there any topics on the minutes that we need to adjust or amend before we take up a motion? Okay,
Madam Chair, I will move approval of the minutes.
very good.
Second.
Okay, excellent. All right, so we are going to vote.
Mover, Commissioner Marks,
Mhm.
Seconder, Commissioner Wallace.
Yep.
Commissioner Edwards,
Aye.
Commissioner or Vice Chair Alpert,
Aye.
Chair Kuznick.
Aye.
Item 8.1 passes
Excellent.
5-0.
Okay, very good. All right, item 9, continued items after the close of public hearing. There are none. Item 10, items for open public hearing. There are none. So we move to item 11.1, the public scoping meeting, the San Ramon General Plan 2040, and the Climate Action Plan update. And we have before us Miss Cindy Yee, Senior Planner, to make this presentation. Miss Yee.
Thank you and good evening. It's very nice to see everybody this evening. I'm here tonight to provide a presentation on the General Plan 2040 and Climate Action Plan Update Environmental Impact Report Scoping Session. I have a PowerPoint presentation this evening. Make sure I get that up on the screen here. Great. So with me this evening is one of our teaming partners, Rincon Consultants. Leslie Trejo will be providing support this evening on the scoping session. We will be switching back and forth with our presentation this evening. But we do also joining us on the Zoom call, additional consultants that are also available if there are other questions that need to be directed to them. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and just turn it over to Leslie. We have the scoping meeting, and we'll be going over some general background about CEQA and the general plan update and the various parts of the environmental impact report that will need to be focused on, and then receiving public comments this evening. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Leslie. Thanks.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners, and the public. As Cindy said, my name is Leslie Trejo, and I am with Rincon Consultants. The city has hired Rincon Consultants to conduct an environmental analysis of the San Ramon 2040 General Plan, the Climate Action Plan Update, and those planning efforts via preparation of a programmatic environmental impact report pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. During this public meeting, we will cover the scoping meeting and its regulatory purpose of review under CEQA, the CEQA review steps and the opportunity for public input, an overview of the 2040 General Plan and the Climate Action Plan planning efforts, the EIR approach and the topics to be analyzed, the scope of the EIR, which is the primary focus of this meeting, our estimated EIR schedule, and most importantly, public EIR scoping comments. So what is the purpose for scoping meeting tonight? The purpose of tonight is to inform the community and interested agencies about the plans, to solicit input regarding the EIR scope, and inform the community about future opportunities for input. The regulatory purpose, in this case, the California Environmental Quality Act, again, also known as CEQA, is to disclose the significant environmental impacts, including any significant effects of the proposed plans, identify ways to avoid or reduce environmental impacts through planning design or environmental mitigation measures, consider feasible alternatives to proposed actions, and fold public participation into the overall planning process. This slide demonstrates the CEQA scope and the opportunity for public input. This process was started in this blue top left. Yes, the process was started when the notice of preparation was issued for the EIR on June 24th, 2022. Today, we are where the orange boxes redlined in or outlined in red, the EIR public scoping meeting. We will then move on to review and evaluate public scoping comments that will be also folded into the EIR. The comments received during the scoping meeting and the notice of preparation period will then be incorporated into the EIR, and then Rincon will perform the technical analysis of this plans, which is that left middle yellow box. Future opportunity for public input exists during the circulation of the draft EIR, which will be a period of 45 days long. During that time, both written comments on the draft EIR can be submitted and verbal comments can be provided at another public meeting held on the draft EIR. We'll then move on to respond to comments, which is that bottom green on the left. During public review of the EIR, the public meeting will then, oh, sorry, I lost my place. The comments received during public review of the EIR will be folded into a response to comments document, along with a mitigation monitoring and reporting program, errata of the final EIR, and the final EIR before finally being certified by the city. This slide shows the simultaneous San Ramon planning efforts. The EIR will assess the environmental impacts of these three efforts, which include the general plan update through the horizon year of 2040 and also includes the housing element, the climate action plan update, and zoning amendments. The general plan is the overarching policy framework that guides citywide growth and development through 2040. The climate action plan is a citywide greenhouse gas inventory and forecast that would include greenhouse gas reduction measures and actions. And finally, the zoning code amendments are important for implementation, including making land use designations and density and height allowance updates consistent with the updated general plan. I'll now pass it over to Cindy.
Thank you. So this slide will probably be pretty familiar with for the people watching. We've through our process of public outreach have talked about the general plan update and the purpose of the update. The update really is a technical effort. It's not meant to be comprehensive. The modifications would be done to the existing general plan, the 2035 general plan, which was adopted in 2015. So a lot of the policies that currently exist in the general plan 2035 are still applicable, but there are some new emerging issues that need to be addressed. Primarily the changes that are required by the state for update to the housing element. The review is not meant to change the general plan framework or vision, and we are not proposing any urban growth boundary changes as part of the update. So the general plan will include various updates and additions to the existing general plan. You have your mandatory general plan elements and some additional new provisions that will need to be reviewed as part of that general plan update. Inclusions of policies for environmental justice and some additional safety element requirements that are mandatory under state law. As Leslie mentioned, housing will be conducted under a separate CEQA review process because we are in a time limitations for housing element adoption. And so CEQA will be conducted on the housing element through a separate analysis. So as Leslie mentioned, there are some simultaneous updates that are being done to the, as part of this project, the technical zoning amendments that have to be completed concurrently with the housing element, as well as following the adoption of the general plan. So as we've discussed, zoning amendments implement the general plan and implement the housing element. And so as part of those implementation tools, you'll see updates to zones and densities and changes that would be consistent with the general plan and the housing element. We'll also have updated mixed use standards as we've been discussing quite extensively. And then preparing updates to objective design standards, development standards, such as height, parking, and setbacks, as well as all of the additional graphics and photos that go into the zoning ordinance text that will graphically depict those standards. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and pass it back on to Leslie.
Thanks, Cindy. The Climate Action Plan update is an implementation strategy for countywide greenhouse gas emissions mitigation to be implemented within the city and is directly related to the general plan air quality and greenhouse gas element update. The main components of the general plan, the Climate Action Plan, are to quantify existing and projected greenhouse gas emissions associated with the estimated community growth, set reduction goals through the plan's horizon year, develop and quantify measures and actions to achieve those goals, and finally, to establish a framework for monitoring emissions levels. Our approach for the EIR This is a programmatic document in nature with a broad comprehensive evaluation to cover the many actions of these longer range plans. Many future development projects and infrastructure projects will require additional project-specific environmental review, given that this program EIR analysis will not be parcel specific, meaning that it will not analyze any specific projects within the city. The EIR will focus on reasonably foreseeable direct and indirect physical environmental effects that could result from the updates to the general plan and the climate action plan, including zoning amendments. It will screen which land use changes, general plan policies and programs, and climate action plan actions are likely to result in environmental impacts, and it will also consider and evaluate alternatives to the draft general plan. On the screen is a list of topics to be analyzed in the EIR, and I'll pause for a minute just so you can read. All right. Our projected EIR schedule, please submit your comments by July 25th, 2022 by 5 p.m. We will estimate that the draft EIR will be available to the public in early 2023, at which time a public meeting will also be held. And finally, the final EIR, 2040 General Plan, Climate Action Plan, and zoning amendments are estimated to be completed and public hearings to be held in mid-2023. We welcome your comments. Again, please submit your comments either verbally at this meeting or submit them via mail or email to Cindy. And for more information, visit plansanramon.com or the City of San Ramon website. Thank you for your participation. And Cindy, if you'd like to connect.
So this meeting has been noticed both through the state clearinghouse, on the city's website, direct notices to property owners and interested parties, as well as in the newspaper. And so this evening, we're hoping to receive those comments on the EIR so that we can adequately prepare the technical updates necessary to review the analysis for CEQA. So with that, I can certainly answer any questions that you might have, or we can jump right into public comments if you wish.
So commissioners, clarifying questions before we, okay, Commissioner Wallace?
Yeah, I had one question. I know that for the new general plan, there's a new general plan element called environmental justice. However, when I looked at the government code, there are requirements that have to be met before that element needs to be done. It did not appear to me that our city qualifies to have that particular element in our general plan update. And I wondered if staff had looked at that. Or the consultant, or anybody else.
Sure.
I don't know the specifics of it, but I do know that City of San Ramon is not required to make an environmental justice element.
Okay, it's nice to know I can read the code still.
You were great.
Okay, Commissioner Albert. Sorry.
Could you clarify the general plan EIR vis-a-vis comparison to the housing element EIR and the update to housing element versus the update to the general plan? Because there's all these sort of different timelines floating in my head.
Yes, it can get quite confusing because we are on parallel paths to on the two projects. The two projects is defined by CEQA. They do have different CEQA analysis timeframes because we are planning to adopt the housing element in advance of the general plan update. And so there will need to be environmental analysis done as part of the housing element update that we're currently working on now. The scope of that project is fairly defined in terms of the housing opportunity sites that we've identified and what the growth is expected from those units. And so the CEQA analysis that's going to be conducted that we're currently doing now will still have all of the analysis of each of those topics that we identified on that slide. It'll just be more focused on the housing element update specifically. And then because the general plan incorporates all of the other elements in addition to the housing element, we will be doing as part of the general plan update, all of the analysis for any of the impacts from changes that are being made to each of those elements, as well as incorporating into that the assumptions that are being made in the housing element that affect noise or traffic or long-term, economic element changes that may occur.
Thank you. That helps.
Commissioner Edwards, questions? No? Commissioner Marks, clarifying questions? All right, so let's go to see if there is, we'll open public comment. Do we have any speaker cards on this?
We do not have any speaker cards at this time, nor do we have any late written communication, but we do have speakers in the audience and on Zoom. So our first speaker is call-in user 1.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So these questions are for Leslie because I suspect that we're paying an arm and a leg to her company, but her presentation was way too general. And I don't really know why we hire a consulting company to come and tell us a bunch of things we already know. I would have liked that she would have told us how her company will be implementing the specific elements on the EIR that they're obligated to research. And I want to know their qualifications and if there's any equipment that they're using and how that they're going to get specifically these subject matters that were in one of her presentation slides. Hazardous materials, greenhouse gas, how is she going to measure that? And, if Ms. E is going to provide specific sites for her and any geological soils. Living in the Doherty Valley, I am a victim of geological soil movement. And I really don't want anyone who is going to be living in multiple floors of affordable housing in the future to go through what I went through. So I'm doing my neighborly fiduciary duty to ask these questions to save a life in the future. Population and housing, what does she mean by that? What specifically is she going to look for? She never explained these. These are just like, pretty words for her presentation. And wildlife, a wildfire. Okay, we have had many wildfires in the surrounding area, and the last ones in our Contra Costa County involves a grass fire. I would like to know what is she looking for? Hydrology quality, water quality, that is so important. What is she looking for? Cultural resources. I remember San Ramon High School, when they were working on their schools, they had dug up some tribal bones in the past. So how is she going to mitigate that so we can remain respectful of the tribal cultures, as well as biological resources? What is she talking about? What is biological resources? I would like these questions answered. Please answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
We do not have any other hands raised in the audience.
Okay. Is there a motion to close the public comment?
I'll move to close public comment.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Sorry, could we do that again?
I made the motion.
Okay, and Commissioner Edwards, second.
Okay, mover Vice Chair Alpert.
Okay, are we? I'm never sure how we do this.
And I think I might be signed in as Commissioner Wallace on this device. So
Uh-oh.
it just, it's showing up here with his name, but. Yeah. Sorry. I just voted.
I don't know. We're all goofed up.
We can move to a roll call vote if you want someone.
All right, so
Okay,
should
I'm
should we
gonna go
do
ahead
the
and-
old school?
Oh, they're all coming up. There you go.
Okay. Are we good? All right. So the motion to close public hearing has passed. Thank you so much. All right. Discussion, commissioners, before we move on this topic? Okay. All right. So thank you so much. We look forward to hearing more about the report.
Through the chair, we need a motion to continue receiving public comments until the date. Cindy, if you could restate the motion for the chair, please.
Okay. A little bit different than my apologies. All right, let's
Yes.
clarify this.
Thank you. So the public scoping session period runs from June 24th through July 25th. And so in the staff report, there is, it identifies how to get those comments to the city through email. There's also public comment option on the city's website. So, or sending in letters or certainly emails or calls to the city. So we encourage any comments about the EIR to be sent to the city within that time frame. As Leslie mentioned, we will continue the public hearings on the environmental impact report as those it starts to get into that draft form and before the final adoption of that document. But the next time that you'll probably see the environmental document is once those technical updates are made to each of those elements, all of the studies that go with updating those sections of the general plan, and you'll be able to see that in draft form.
Okay. So do we need a corrected motion then?
Please, if you wouldn't mind, so it would be to close the public hearing and continue to see written comments until July 25th at 5 p.m.
Question. I have a question.
Yes.
The chair. What if we say public comment has to be in by tomorrow at 5 o'clock? Can we do that?
It
Do we
doesn't-
even have to do that? Or is the public comment period set by state law?
It's a 30-day public comment period for the notice of preparation.
Yeah,
So it
but
is set
isn't
by,
that set by state law?
it is, but for clarity for the public, we'd like the commission to have a motion to continue to receive comments until July 25th.
Okay, that just seems to me to be superfluous.
Do you want me to amend the motion that I did before or make a new motion?
Please, if you would mind, you can amend the motion.
Okay,
and
I'll
restate
amend the
it.
motion to close the public hearing and continue to accept comments until July the 25th.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All right. Let's see if we can.
Sorry, I can't.
I'm voting yes. Okay. I think it passed.
Okay.
So I'll take a roll call vote. Mover, Vice Chair Alpert,
Aye.
Seconder, Commissioner Edwards,
Aye.
Commissioner Marks,
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace,
Aye.
Chair Kuznick.
Aye. Thank you. Okay. I think we're back on track here. Everybody good with the EIR information? Thank you so much. And thank you for the presentation. We look forward to seeing your work. All right, we are going to item next, which is information from our Open Space Committee. And let's see, where is it? It's in my agenda here. Give me a moment, please. Here we go. Oh, here we go. Yeah. All right, this is item 13, study session, commissioner liaison reports and interest items staff report. Item 13.1, the 2022 Open Space Preservation Plan review. All right. As introduced by Parks and Community Service representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and Commission. I'd like to provide a brief introduction and then turn it over to the Open Space Advisory Committee Chair, Lorraine Kellick, and Vice Chair, Bob Peoples, to present the draft 2022 Open Space Preservation Plan. The plan being presented to you this evening elaborates and builds on a 2013 open space plan prepared by staff. This process started several months ago, and the committee feels the draft document is ready to be presented to the Planning Commission for your feedback. As you will hear during the presentation, the committee solicited feedback from a number of local agencies with interest in open space preservation. Some of these agencies included East Bay Regional Park District, various departments of the Contra Costa County, and then local land trusts such as John Muir Land Trust, Save Mount Diablo, and Tri-Valley Conservancy. In addition, over the past few months, staff from Parks and Community Services, Community Development, and Public Works Engineering Division have worked with the Protection and Preservation Subcommittee of the OSAC to ensure that the proposed 2022 Open Space Preservation Plan complements and/or enhances current policy and practices, and in principle is in general alignment with the general plan and existing specific plans. After thorough review, city staff recommends that the 2022 Open Space Preservation Plan be utilized as a starting point to be further refined by a land use planning consultant with the additional resources and expertise to ensure the accuracy of the information, further vet concepts presented in the plan, and gather further pertinent information from outside agencies and/or landowners. The extensive work completed by the Protection and Preservation Committee has created a solid base of information and concepts that can be further cultivated and developed to enhance the necessary safeguards to protect and preserve open space in and around San Ramon. And finally, before turning it over to the OSAC Chair Kellick for the presentation, it is recommended the Commission receive the presentation, provide feedback, and recommend revisions to be included in a presentation to City Council. And with that, I will turn it over to Chair Kellick and Vice Chair Bob Peoples.
Hello, good evening. My name is Lorraine Kellick. I'm currently serving as chair of the Open Space Advisory Committee for San Ramon, and I want to thank you for receiving our presentation tonight. What you have in your packet is a full copy of this document called the Draft 2022 Preservation Plan, and all the slides that you'll see here were in the packet. So we're going to kind of give you an overview of what the advisory committee does and then why we're on your agenda tonight, what we're asking you for. So as we say, the only way to protect the flora and fauna from the impacts of people is through the efforts of people. And our committee serves in a role to advise and keep focus on what we all cherish, which is our open space. So we do a lot more than lead hikes with residents. We have a lot of work to do. So Open Space Advisory Committee reports directly to the City Council, and our charge is prioritizing land, recommending properties for preservation, advising on opportunities and threats to open space, providing a forum for public input, seeking partnerships with other advocacy groups, and then reporting annually to the City Council. To provide valuable advice, we work with the staff, our agency partners, and others to educate ourselves on a variety of issues and resources and collect and vet information so the recommendations from our committee can have some actual value. Open Space Advisory Committee is not limited to the city boundaries or by the city boundaries. And what we're talking about tonight is an aspirational vision and a recommended action plan for helping San Ramon attain its goals of maintaining open space and including and paying attention to areas that are not controlled by the city, but are also of interest to the city. So our draft title for this document that you have in your packet is the 2022 Open Space Preservation Plan, Protection, Access, and Partnerships. It is not a master plan, but it is in alignment with the current existing master plans and in alignment with the general direction of the updates that are in process. Protection, access, and partnerships are so key that we include them in our title, and we have created subcommittees to kind of focus and make sure we have, focused attention in all our Open Space Advisory Committee work on these three elements. So, as we refine this piece and prepare to present it to the City Council, we've gone through several drafts and internally and held meetings with different partners. So you can kind of see how that flow has gone over our work of the last year. The original goal was to update the 2013 plan, and what has happened is this has really grown and expanded, grew in scope. It's more than a report. It's not quite a master plan, but it's more than a report. It's more than limited to just the city property. It includes, proposals and recommended actions. And so Bob Peoples will be here in a moment, and he's our vice chair. He's the author of this piece, and it is in its draft form. He's going to explain the body of work and answer questions, and we'll kind of talk about how this is how we want to incorporate your feedback as we moved from a draft plan to a final plan and get it ready to present to City Council. I will let Bob show you what he's got.
Good evening. I'm Bob Peoples, and I had the privilege of having a lead on developing this plan, a lead for the subcommittee and developing it and working with the full committee and a number of other folks to get where we are. I want to add my thanks to you for the opportunity to share what we're doing to present some proposals for continuing and enhancing preservation of open space important to the city, its residents, and its workforce. I'm going to focus on just a few aspects of how we got to where we are today. The entire description of is included in the plan and in the beginning of the plan, and there's a bunch of appendixes which make it look very long, but there's about 8 pages of text, I think, at the beginning that encapsulate almost everything that we've been discussing on this and continue to work on. The plan kind of originated in response to interest from the City Council in understanding something about open space protection priorities that were expressed to some of us during interviews to become members of the committee and so forth. Last year, as part of our planning efforts, we decided to review the report on open space preservation priorities and potential funding methods, which is the long name for what we now refer to as the 2013 plan. Beginning last June, the subcommittee began reviewing the 2013 plan, including its development and what would be required to simply update it. Initially, we had a very favorable opinion of the 2013 plan. It seemed sound and appeared to provide useful information. But as we understood more about what was in there, as our understanding increased, we began to see the opportunity for methodology improvements, some enhancement of metrics used to set priorities, and as well as additional priority criteria and parcel attributes that could be considered in establishing priorities. And as we continue to work with this information and think about the program, we began to see a much broader picture of what was needed, and came up, as Lorraine was describing, with a longer-term aspirational vision for preserving open space and the rural character of the cities within the city's planning area. Most of the focus of this plan is in outside the city boundaries, but within the planning area. That vision and long-term time frame resulted in a different approach than perhaps you would find in a more traditional open space preservation plan. The focus was on maintaining and sustaining existing open space regardless of who owned it. rather than purchasing properties on a priority basis. And again, because we took a very long range perspective on this, we felt that this would be effective. I'm not quite sure how to. When it's all right. Again, I've kind of been going over some of the intent of the plan as it's evolved here. And the focus is on retaining the open space by maintaining current land uses. And continue to acquire from willing sellers, or if development is contemplated. The focus is on the entire planning area and outside the city boundaries. And we considered it as we worked on this and developed information about these areas, considered in terms of 3 segments that kind of naturally fall out. Again, this slide, provides further elaboration of the plan's intent. We began to realize fairly soon in working on this that beyond preservation of open space, there were other dimensions of the issue that warranted attention. The first additional issue that arose is the need to have access to protected open space. And open space in the city, and I think perhaps throughout the whole Bay Area, is almost inseparable from access to use it. We then recognized that partnerships were also essential to protect and manage open space. And a really important point here is that eventually our thinking really morphed into an evaluation of efforts and accomplishments to protect open space to date. And use that understanding of what programs currently existed and their effectiveness as a basis for our recommendations for further actions, many of which included continuation or enhancement of current activities. There's no question from our review of this that past and continuing efforts have been effective in protecting open space and have produced substantial results, as you can see on the 3 segment maps that are in attachment B to the plan. There is an awful lot of land that already has protection within this area, and approximately 2/3 of the 8,400 acres that we focused on have some level of protection beyond that achieved through city and county planning activities and requirements. Some of that protection, such as Williamson Act contracts that reduce tax rates on open space and agricultural land, have been in place for more than 40 years. And there's approximately 3,100 plus acres of Williamson Act contracts within the areas that we're looking at. But the area of interest that's been protected in perpetuity and accessible to the public is only a small portion of the total. And less, only a small portion of the total is owned in fee, by a conservation organization and would be considered protected in perpetuity. And less than half of that area is available for public use currently. when we start talking about recommendations, we have 12 recommendations related to protection and preservation of open space. And they're summarized on these two slides and discussed in a little bit more detail on the in the report itself. In retrospect, it's probably not surprising that the desire for access has an equivalent to the focus on protecting open space for many people in the city. I recently saw something from East Bay Mud where their first reservoirs that they built almost 100 years ago now, almost immediately when they built them and acquired the land and built them, there were people wanting to have access to it. So that equation or that equivalency of open space and access is nothing new, and it still is a major focus. Protection and access in effect are opposite sides of the same coin, but there are an awful lot of factors that impede providing access to even areas that are open. There are land use planning requirements that East Bay Parks needs to go through in order to open up an area, to limit their liability and to ensure that what they're looking at is something that's going to persist for a very long time. Given the fact that we've kind of identified this, we think that there's going to be an opportunity for the committee over the next few years to be able to facilitate resolution of some of these issues as we move forward. And again, there are 5 recommendations related to access, facilitating access to these areas in the report. Maintaining and enhancing partnerships is also very central to a successful program in the past with, well over 90% of the area that we're looking at outside the city boundaries. We are really dependent on the cooperation and support for other agencies, starting with East Bay Parks, but a number of other entities. In particular, as we worked on this and thought about it, we also need to work with the landowners and with residents who live outside the city, but within the planning area, incorporate them, get them involved in it, so that partnership becomes very, very central. Again, we have identified so far 4 recommendations to go forward for consideration by the city council and the city agencies. And recently, the committee began to consider the possibility of another recommendation there about somehow or other involving agencies that are involved that we work with and residents outside this from the planning area, but outside the city, and OSAC activities. And that's something we're considering, and it may be added to this. And again, I just want to finish up here by trying to be very clear that, the plan is not presented, doesn't involve wholesale changes in current efforts. We really want to build on some very good activities that have gone on over the past few years. And I think with our review of those activities, we have been able to pinpoint some recommendations, which I think will build on those efforts as we move forward. Again, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We just want to make the decision processes and actions taking more effective and realizing the vision outlined. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. So I will admit that most of the concepts and the contents of this report are above my pay grade, and that's why we're here tonight. You folks are knowledgeable and passionate about the direction of San Ramon, and so we want to get your reactions and feedback. The next steps for this are to incorporate feedback that we got from Parks and Community Services and from your commission, and incorporate that and move from our draft report to our final report, and then get that ready to present to City Council. And then what they do with that is ultimately up to them, but we're trying to have the most, complete, transparent, and inclusive advice that we can give them. So we'd, Bob's going to help with clarifying questions and whatever you have for us. And then, we welcome your feedback.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions before we open up for public comment? Commissioner Edwards?
Thank you. Just a quick clarifying question. Throughout this report, there are references to common areas that are owned by homeowners associations. Can you provide us with an example of those common areas just for some context?
One of the big areas, almost every development that's adjacent to this open space will have open land that is held in common by the HOA. It's a buffer, usually a buffer, where they manage that. One of the areas that has received a lot of attention, there's a series of parcels, but owned by the Bollinger Hills Homeowners Association, and it runs from Morgan Drive opposite the entrance to Bishop Ranch, along the hillside over to Memorial Park. And that's a common area, and it has the potential. I mean, it was actually recognized in a 2013 trails master plan that was developed for the city as a potential site for a trail. I mean, I was not aware of that until recently, that 2013 plan. But when I looked at the map, I knew from talking to people in that homeowners association that it was their land. And it just seemed like it would be a logical place to put a trail, to provide access, if we could work something out with them. But there are also another number of areas, particularly here in the West Side Hills segment, where the developments have open space between the houses and some of the open space parcels, which are held in common. Oftentimes they use them to create fire breaks and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
But they're identified, I think, in the city's maps. When you get down into the detail, you can see them there. And we've tried to identify them in the report itself, in the attachments, the appendices. They're listed, identified as on the maps, as well as in the tables that support the maps.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other clarifying questions, commissioners? Okay.
So ultimately tonight, you want recommendations to the report to go to City Council. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And then could you, and maybe it's a question for Keith or Kathy, I'm not sure. The open space preservation plan, how does that relate to the open space and conservation element of the general plan? How do those two documents either work together, or are they? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. In the chapter on the parks plan, there's actually a specific call out that there's a parks master plan to guide the evolution of the parks in the city. I didn't see that in the open space plan. So that's kind of where my question, the genesis of my question.
And I'm going to direct that question to Lauren Barr.
Okay.
So ultimately, the open space plan that we're talking about tonight would be an implementation tool of the general plan open space element. And so there may be some need to look at cross-pollination of policy recommendations to reference between the documents. And that's part of the motivation to take this to the next level through a more refined effort with a land planning consultant to make those connections back and forth.
So in the general plan, we always talk about guiding policies and implementing policies. And
Right.
is the intent to ultimately take this plan and enhance the open space plan or have a reference to another document? Because it felt to me like a lot of the recommendations with slight wording changes could be implementation policies.
They probably could be if you want that level of detail in your general plan. This is a document that can evolve over time and be revisited. So generally speaking, we like to have the policy direction be a little bit more broad in nature and have this as an implementation tool that can evolve over time with needs as they change for the city.
Okay, thanks, Lauren.
If I could just point out one aspect of this, the general plan, element 8, includes language establishing the Open Space Advisory Committee, and it sets out the parameters of what it wants the advisory committee to do and who it reports to and so forth. So again, we've tried to be consistent with that and build on that.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, well, and on behalf of the Planning Commission, we thank you for your report. It was very thorough and appreciate your presentation here tonight. At this time, we will move to if there are public comment on this topic, either in person or by telecommunications.
So we do have one comment through Zoom, or one commenter. We did not receive any speaker cards or any written late communication. So I'll go ahead and promote our speaker, call-in user 1.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. With all due respect to Mr. Peoples' hard work, I do have objection, and I ask the commissioners to please ask the Open Space Committee to double check their land with the DB-GAD plan of control. A lot of these open space land actually belong to the DB-GAD residents because we are paying annually in assessments to maintain these open space. These are not cities' jurisdiction. So for the city to have not consulted with the DB-GAD residents and briefed them on the report, it is not only disrespect, it is an overreach of the city's power. Furthermore, by forwarding this to the city council, you're asking the city councils to rule on behalf of the city when they have dual responsibilities. And I've been protesting this because 2 out of the 5 city council members are no longer electable because of the district election by the GAD residents, by the Doherty Valley GAD residents. Therefore, they have conflicts of interest. I do not have full faith that the current district elected council members are able to make proper judgments in the benefit of the Doherty Valley GAD residents who are faithfully paying the annual assessment according to this report. So before you forward this report to the city council members, I urge you to do your fiduciary duty by asking this open space committee to double check all the lands that they are proposing to either preserve or to develop and run them through Mr. Bartlett, who is by his duty the official manager of the Doherty Valley GAD, and then have him call a public meeting and allow Doherty Valley GAD residents to speak up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Do we have any other items for public comment?
We do not have any more commenters.
Excellent. So we will close public comment on this topic. Commissioners, feedback for our open space representatives. Sorry.
Go ahead.
We're gonna do this old school. I'm just gonna look at you with my teacher eyes. Yes, that's right.
First off, I want to say, I think that this is a very well done plan. And my compliments to the actual preparers and the Open Space Committee. I like it because I think it's respectful of and builds on past open space preservation elements or efforts, I should say. It's wide reaching in its analysis of what needs to be done, setting priorities, identifying key parcels of property to preserve, and I think importantly, offering recommendations regarding key actions to be taken. I don't have any criticisms to offer at all, but I do have some questions. And my first question is regarding recommendation P7, which is on packet page 37. The second dashed statement says, and this is the recommendation regarding a willing seller policy. Consider a more aggressive approach to acquire the most threatened or other priority parcels. And my question to you is, can you give us some examples of what you mean by a more aggressive approach?
The city has a policy of trying to work with willing sellers. And I think a lot of the attention, the negotiations that go on between city staff and landowners are people that are open to the potential of protecting this. But there are some other folks who, for one reason or another, are interested in cashing in on the value of the land that they have. And that it may require more other techniques. And there is the ability, not, again, what we're talking here is outside for the most part, outside the city boundaries. So it would not involve the city per se, but there is the possibility of using eminent domain to deal with some of these issues if somebody is determined to that they want to develop an area and we can't reach agreement to provide the necessary funding to pay them. My sense is from everything I've seen is that it doesn't need to get to that stage, but I think that and I know East Bay Parks prefers to deal on a willing selling basis also, but they have the authority to condemn land and also to and have used, I think, in a few instances. But again, that's the least desirable thing we can do, but it is part of the tool, one of the tools that's available to work on this.
I thought you were sneaking up on that, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, they can be more aggressive, but again, I think the desire is not to reach that position. We're making in terms of trying to work with landowners in particular, we want to make it clear that we have no problem if they want to continue to use the land the way they have been, if it's a ranch or whatever, that's perfectly fine, into the foreseeable or into as far into the future as they want to do that. But if they do want to withdraw some of the value of that property, then we'd like to be able to purchase it from them, or have somebody purchase it for work with East Bay Parks and whomever to purchase that in the future. And that has been very effective, I think, in the past. And it can also be a very effective tool in the future. And we also have some, by using some of the planning requirements, we particularly focused on transferable development rights as an opportunity to acquire property. And but there are a lot of problems with that. But and that falls into your bailiwick really when we start talking about transferable development rights, because you've got to have a place where you can place those that increased density of development. And that means that, again, that's, I think, a more aggressive approach to this than the traditional willing seller approach that we've had, that we'd like to explore on the committee. We've talked about it. It's something we'd like to explore that. And again, that's going to require working with the county also on this. It's not just the city in that instance. It's going to have to be done with the county.
My next question is really about the finances of preservation acquisition of open space. The acquisition and preservation of open space, whether you purchase the fee title or you purchase public access easements through a property, even if you do it with a partner, is expensive. And my question is, did the committee consider, as a part of its overall recommendations, during the city council budget process, asking the city to consider an annual contribution to the open space fund, so that over the long term, the fund grows until you start actually using it? You know, given the amount of acreage that you're talking about, the number of properties, my recollection of what's in the fund today is not adequate to do all that much. I don't mean to sneer at $1 million or $1.5 million, but given the value of land in this area, that's not a whole lot. And even with the financial capabilities of East Bay Parks, the county, or any land trust that might be interested, it's still a matter ultimately of dollars. And in my experience in working with property owners like this, they're not going to sell the property to you or allow you to purchase an access easement at much less than fair market value of the property that's being affected. And so again, while budgeting is not the purview of the Planning Commission, as a recommendation to the City Council to let them know that you are aware of the cost, it just seemed to me a recommendation that ought to be in there somewhere, that annually, as a budget item, whatever the council deems appropriate based on that year's budget, there ought to be something.
There are different ways of funding the acquisition. I mean, recently the city was able to, by expanding the urban growth boundary to include the laborers, the developed portion of laborers, to acquire, I don't know, 176 acres or something like that. And you know, that's again a willing seller situation. And we have the opportunity to do something on like that in the future. But I think you're right. It would be desirable to, if the city could find a way to continue to build up that open space fund, and as well as consider these other non-fiscal means of acquiring the property. Those come with, some people get really upset about it, the Tasahara Parks development over here, where the county has agreed to expand the urban limit line by 30 acres and acquire 750 acres or something like that. Is you know, another instance where there are non-financial means of acquiring the property. And it requires just a lot of creativity and willingness to look at those. But the bottom line is that it's still really good to have a nice pot of money there that can be applied when it's necessary.
Sure. You know, somebody once said that you can tell how serious a government is by the dollars it puts behind whatever it is it's talking about.
Okay.
One aspect of the open space preservation efforts in the city that I'd like to see implemented is an effort that would increase public support for open space preservation and acquisition, and therefore the expenditure of funds. I'd like to see an annual report presented to the city council on open space efforts of the previous year. And to that end, I'm going to reference General Plan 2035's open space element, implementing policy 8.4-1-5, bullet statements 3, 4, and 6. And let me read them into the record. Advise the city council regarding opportunities and resources available for establishing a secure funding source for the open space acquisition, permanent preservation, and maintenance of properties contiguous to the city's limits. And you've talked about future work to identify funding sources. Provide a forum for input for the community regarding open space issues which are consistent with the committee's charge. You may have had these forums before. I don't recall seeing them, but it seems to me a forum held before the city council that's well advertised, talking about open space would be helpful and as a recommendation. And then prepare and submit an annual work program for approval by the city council. Again, those may be things that have already happened, and I didn't see them, but I'd like to see that happen at a much greater level. And additionally, in addition to the items that are called out in the general plan of the city, I'd like to see a review of discussions and actions that were taken over the previous year to work with property owners. I know you cannot, during a negotiation, get into a lot of detail because a lot of that is privileged information or very sensitive, and especially if there are ongoing discussions. But nonetheless, when talking in general terms, you can at least let the public know what has gone on and what was the outcome of some of that and what were the lessons learned. I'd like to see why discussions were successful or were not. I'd like to see an accounting of city funds experienced in furtherance of the acquisition of key properties in the city. I think the public needs to get a sense of how expensive this is and why there's a need, if they're really serious about preserving open space in the West Side Hills or in the Crow Canyon, Bollinger area or Tassajara Valley. It's an expensive undertaking and it requires public support, but the public has to be apprised of what are those costs and how much were they. And I'd like to see the identification of any funds received in that year. I can recall, in fact, all of us, I think can recall when the Faria Preserve was being discussed at the city council level, council member alone made the comment that the developer ought to contribute a fairly significant amount of money to the open space fund, which they ultimately did. There may be other opportunities that are coming down the road for that, but the general public in a report ought to be told what have we received and what was the quid pro quo, so to speak. So again, I'm very supportive of this plan. And again, whatever report you may have done, I may simply have missed, though I try to watch this stuff pretty closely. But I'd like to see something like that.
One of the things we tried to do in this report is to talk about, what's already been protected and particularly what's been protected since 2013. And there is a table in there which has some of that information in there. But in terms of updating it annually, we haven't yet. I don't think gotten into it on the annual report.
Not on the details. So,
Yeah, but that's worth considering.
Yeah, so one thing that we do on the advisory committee is we do make an annual work plan. We work with our city staff to lay out our goals for the next year, and then get last year's accomplishments and this year's goal. Those are all brought to the city council. We did that in July this year, June or July this year, just trying to get on the agenda. Took a little time, but we do that, and so we try to make sure that we know that is put on the agenda and noticed publicly, and then we invite the public input, all of our Open Space Advisory Committee monthly meetings are Monday mornings at 8:30 a.m. and those are all public notice. So members of the public can sign up for the alerts when they come out, or they can just watch the calendar, and they have, well, the Zoom links in the past, and now will be,
What I'm talking about, though, is an annual comprehensive report that
Mhm.
I think should be made available to the public. One last point. In the report, you talk about threats, and you identify what they are, and I think you did a good job. I want to point out what I think is a threat that has been ongoing for the last 20 years, and that isn't a threat to just San Ramon, but rather an increasingly conservative court system. When I was in planning school, the first document we had to read in a law class was called The Great Property Rights Fallacy. Maybe you're shaking your head, maybe you're aware of it. The courts at that time gave local jurisdictions a pretty free hand in regulating property, all property for development purposes, open space purposes, almost any purposes. And they deemed it was part of the health, safety, and general welfare obligation of governments. Over time, that's been changed by the courts as the courts have become increasingly conservative and take a much more restrictive view of what governments can do relative to property rights. Some of the protections that you are relying on may not be there. And while I don't know that any of us can forecast what's actually going to happen, we need to keep our eye on where are the courts going, especially obviously the US Supreme Court. It's the kind of situation that if the court, as comprised today, takes a very conservative point of view over a property rights dispute, we're going to have to respond pretty quickly to some of the things that we think we are regulating, which we may not any longer be regulating. Hence the need for dollars in the fund to try and buy what we can relative to the most threatened properties that you've identified. So I think that's something that the committee ought to take a look at with perhaps the city attorney.
Yeah,
But again, I thank you for the report.
I think you're exactly right that there's a lot of protection out there now. Some of it is less than full preservation of the area. But I think the efforts by the city and the county to use that ability to the planning authority that they have to protect some of this land has been very instrumental. That's why we have as much open space remaining today as we do. But you can just look out there and you can see all sorts of, the economic pressures as well as changing judicial philosophy are all threats to this that make that open space more vulnerable. And therefore we need to, do everything we can to try to acquire rights to the property rather than just depending on the planning requirements, the land use requirements. It's a long-term effort, and it's something that I think the committee would like to work with the commission as well as the planning staff and so forth to continue to develop that over time. And there is a lot of effort on this, but we probably need to up our game, and put more effort into it as time goes on.
Commissioner Wallace, you show up on my screen as the next.
I show up down here, but I'm not sure.
But since you called to me, I know it's not complete until I say a few things. I agree with Commissioner Marks's comments. I'm probably a little bit more concerned about the conservative courts than he is. I just can't wait till they say you can't do anything on private property unless you can prove that in 1789 our founders would have done exactly the same thing. But who am I to say what they're going to do? The Save Our Hills started in the 1990s. And since about that time, the only real development there's been on the West Side Hills is Faria, which was approved back in 2000 when we did the 2020 general plan. But other than that, we've been pretty successful in keeping development on the higher ranges if you don't count Norris Canyon Estates, which of course was developed out in the county. So I think we've done a really good job. And Commissioner Marks pointed out that, you know, the only way to really firmly establish open space is to buy it one way or another. It doesn't have to be fee. It could be a conservation easement or things like that. But as Commissioner Marks aptly pointed out, that does take money. And I believe $1 million is what's coming out of the FREA for the open space fund. I don't know what else might be in there, but
They're
you know
committed to-
pretty well what the price of acreage
They're
is
also
up in there.
committed to protecting 140 acres.
Yeah, it's not a lot of money to try and protect that. So of all the ideas you had, I thought the ones, and you talked about it more times than I can remember, is that the most feasible way to protect our open space outside the city limits, which of course is most of it, as you pointed out, it's also outside not only our UGB, but it's also out the county's urban limit line. And I suspect that's not going to be changed as long as the Sierra Club and Save Mount Diablo have $1 in their checking account. But it's to work with the partners, East Bay Regional Parks, things like that, because A, they have the money, B, they can raise the money. And it's to leverage what we can with the big boys on the block to accommodate that. I don't know, there's a lot of landowners up in the west side that's really looking to sell their property. Probably not, but if they do, they're probably going to be looking at East Bay Regional Parks and those types of entities, East Bay Mud or something, to do that. And that's where you come in. I don't think we have the wherewithal to buy up large tracts on the east side, but we can do what we can to help the big boys do that or get conservation easements, things like that. The west side is pretty well locked up by the development of Doherty Valley. I don't think there's going to be much development out there. I hope not, because I have a hill right behind my house that I kind of like to leave in one piece. So that's really, I don't think that's a big thing. Where you might really get involved, however, is there's developments on the west side that would be north of Crow, Bollinger Canyon, where the Chang property is. Free is contributing land over there. And the idea is to establish the trails that would connect with the ultimate goal of going down the Calaveras Ridge Trail. So that's a place where I think you can get what you have talked about many times in your plan, plus in your meetings, is access to the open space, which really is hiking trails.
Yeah.
And I think that would be probably the most fruitful source of work for your committee going forward. But I wish you all the luck in trying to preserve all the space you can in the foreseeable and long-term future.
Yeah, the trails in Bollinger Canyon are a major flashpoint with the residents that live up there, the 30-some residents. If you've driven up there recently with the seen the respect your neighbor signs, and that's tied into a trail access, a trailhead with parking area. And so those are difficult issues. And again, we're trying to, we've become aware of them, and we're trying to see what we can do to help facilitate resolution of some of those, work something out with folks and maintain contacts and, to build on, to assist the city and East Bay Parks and what they do. And as I think Commissioner Marks mentioned, that, part of the difficulty of providing a lot of detail about what activities go on is that so much of this is confidential, and people don't want, if they talk to you, they don't want that to be spread around what they're saying. So it's a really fine line to walk and to get through that. But it's, again, I think we're aware of the issues, or becoming aware of the issues, and we can work around them and find ways to move forward, I think.
Commissioner Albert, Commissioner Edwards, feedback, comments?
I do, but I think you've been waiting. All right. So I'll thank you also for what's very, very thoughtful plan. I think that whether folks agree with what it contains or not, does not discount the fact that it's a very thoughtful plan, and I appreciate that. I also want to just give you a quick comment that the photographs that are in the plan are just beautiful. And there's no credit given in terms of who took those photographs, but I'd love to see that added. They're just beautifully done. So I've got some quick comments. First, I want to agree with Commissioner Marks about the visibility of the work that you're doing. I think that it is vitally important for the community to get information about the work that many of our committees are doing, but particularly the Open Space Committee. I mean, particularly when you have this kind of an ambitious plan. So I would encourage you to look for opportunities to deliver bite-sized messaging to members of the community, so that open space and its importance to our community is on the radar screen of the people who live here. The reality is that busy people are not going to go looking for this information. So if you can, drop it in their inbox, drop it in their mailbox, and make it visible, I think that that is helpful to the effort. I've got some other kind of pretty specific comments for you. So I'm going to just reference your recommendation P9 on packet page 37. There's an emphasis there on the importance of infill development to help us to satisfy these competing land use objectives. A theme of your report, and it's not, I don't think, explicitly spelled out, is if we want to keep our open space, we have to develop infill. We need to not be doing greenfield development. We need to be doing infill development. We need to be doing dense development. And there's areas in the city that I think that's appropriate. So I'd like to see a little bit more of a focus on those trade-offs, and that you've got, that our land is a limited resource, and we have to make choices, very deliberate choices about what we're going to do with it. So if you want open space, you need to be supporting infill development. You cannot have both because we don't have more land. So that's one point of commentary that I'll give you. Packet page 38, and you talked about this a little bit here about the negotiation and the challenges for the public access easements. I think that we should start looking at ways to limit owner liability in response to those concerns. I also noted, and this is kind of throughout the report as well, about the preference to maintain existing land uses in areas outside the city's jurisdiction. I don't know that that's a feasible goal, simply because we don't have control over the land use decisions that are made outside the city. I am a bit concerned, and this is particularly with reference to a comment on page 27. I'm concerned that aspects of this plan may be perceived as being anti-development as opposed to being smart growth. And I do think that there's a meaningful distinction between those things. It's not just a matter of semantics. So I think that that's something, particularly the paragraph on page 27 that references some of the current legislation. I don't agree that the legislation that requires additional housing development necessarily precludes the open space objectives. So that's just a comment for you to consider. This has been discussed by others as well. I mean, I think 90% of the land area in the plan is beyond our boundaries. And I'm a little bit concerned about the implementation there. It's one thing to support the efforts of other, quasi-governmental agencies to acquire the land, and it's something else to be expending city dollars. And it may be that there's an appetite for that. I think that the appetite to spend city dollars on stuff that's outside of our jurisdictional boundaries goes up, the greater visibility you have. So that's something I think for you to consider. And then my last comment is on packet page number 28, which is dealing with a desire to preserve the undeveloped nature of larger lots where single-family homes currently exist. I think we need to be very careful as a city to make sure that we're not taking any action or expressing any kind of policy objectives that disfavors the construction of accessory dwelling units. We have, I think, a large number of properties in this city where accessory dwelling units could be easily developed. I think that has potential to make a bit of a dent in our housing RENA allocation. And I think that we want to be encouraging that kind of development. I mean, among other things, I think that if you can, develop an accessory dwelling unit or two on a large lot, I think that that's the kind of thing that allows existing residents, particularly older residents, to continue to stay in this city. It lets them have, others in the city. And, a lot of those units are going to be affordable by design. So that's something that I'd like you to think about working on. And those are my comments.
Yeah, well, as a resident of an ADU, a senior citizen resident of an ADU, I understand what you're saying. And certainly our intent was not to discourage that. I think in the committee, there is, and personally, that I believe that we need to, put development into infill, and rather than sprawling out. I don't consider that to be anti-development. It's just directing the development differently than it has perhaps been done in the past.
That I agree with you, and that's the distinction that I would make
Yeah.
for the smart growth.
Yeah.
Clarifying language.
Yeah, the growth is coming. We have a requirement that we've got to, facilitate development of 5,000 plus units. And I think that the efforts that we've done over the last several months illustrate we have land for that, but we don't have to go into the open space areas.
I think what you were referring to is where somebody may have 5 or 10 acre lot with a house on it. But the back part of that would be open space, and we'd like to try to see what we can do to maintain the open space, not to preclude somebody from, subdividing the road frontage or something like that. But rather than, not to actually convert the whole thing to, many, many ADUs or something like that. It's a matter of, it's not precluding that, but we want to keep it from, and I personally, again, talking about the legislation and whatnot, the ability now for somebody to come in and split a property and create a separate parcel, and you start out with 5 acres and you split that into 4 acre and a quarter parcels, and then you split each of those up and you can have a bunch of houses. My concern is you could have a bunch of houses after a while on a relatively small area. I don't know how that's going to work out, and I don't know that much about the law, but I mean, when I look at that, I see that potential. So but we need to address it, and again, not. I personally have a lot of background in housing issues, particularly emergency housing going back 50 years. And we need housing, and, to deal with the housing shortage and the cost of housing and whatnot. So we need to have that, but we also want to keep the open space. And part of what makes San Ramon so desirable a place to live is that, if we can build houses, then people are close to the open space, and it's very attractive to them, so that there's a great value to the residents of the city, even if it's a denser denser development than we've had in the past.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. And like Commissioner Wallace, I live out in the Doherty Valley, and the master plan nature of our community and the open space that we have out there is just highly, highly valuable.
Yeah, again, there's just so much interconnection between, a lot of these development planning issues and trying to protect the open space. And what I think we'd like to do is to work with you folks and the planning staff and the city to, find that kind of a thin line that we can walk and we can have our cake and eat it, so to speak.
Mr. Albert.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Albert.
I have one ticky dot question on packet page 27, plan page 10. You reference the massive increase in housing units assigned to San Ramon in the second cycle of the regional housing needs. We're working on the sixth cycle right now. So just want to clarify, you're talking about the second cycle from many years ago.
I understood Reno was the second cycle. I think there are other requirements before that.
Okay, I'll let you figure that out, but I just want to make sure you're clear and accurate. I'm not going to specifically talk about the how that's captured and sprinkled throughout what the other commissioner said, because I think your ask was really for feedback on what to present to the city council. And I'm going to try and stick to that. And there's a what, and that's the plan. And then there's the how, which is all the tactics and things like that. And I think the plan muddies those two concepts throughout. And I'll also be really honest, I don't really like standalone off-board plans compared to our general plan or a specific plan, because I think it gets really confusing on what document we're supposed to be reading and looking at and what the residents should be looking at. And I'll admit, I didn't take a lot of time. I didn't ask anybody for the 2013 plan. I could not find it. So I'd be concerned about recommending another plan be developed. We already have a walking district plan. We have a bicycle master plan. We have all the specific plans. So I would be really cautious about creating a new standalone economic development specific plan. So we have all these plans, and if there's a good reason to have it, I think we should do it. But if not, my recommendation would be to integrate the recommendations and or the changes into the general plan, open space chapter. And as Lauren said, if there are things in it that, you really do, there's a good reason to have it standalone someplace else, that's great. But that's one recommendation. The second recommendation I have to the city council, be as specific as possible on the ask. What are you actually asking the city council to, make a decision on? Philosophy of open space, I think that's settled, I think you have some very specific things sprinkled through the document you'd like the city council to do. And foremost is you'd like them to budget or plan to hire a consultant. So I think it'd be helpful if you give them a series of things that they can make a decision on, So if it's a consultant that you're trying to convince them to hire, why do you want them to hire a consultant? What do you want them to do? A start of a scope of work. We want the consultant to do these 7 things. I think that would help the city council make a decision as opposed to get captured in some of the same things that we did tonight. And that's how to do open space. And I think that's not what you're really asking them to do at this point. If other recommendations I think I captured in here is somehow doing more partnership with outside agencies that came through loud and clear. Does that turn into an action, for instance, expand the membership of OSAC to include those agencies? But, and that I think that requires, an update to the charter of the OSAC committee. But I think my recommendations is do your best to give them specific things they could decide on, Yeah, that's my advice on the presentation to city council.
Thank you.
And I will have brief comments. And so I think the proposal is thorough and thought through and well documented. But the one thing that I found that seemed to be missing is some discussion of defining urban open space. And given our headlong dash into making the core of our city much more dense, that will become much more important, as well as the hills. I think we have a pretty good feel for what the hills need, but what we don't have yet is a feel for how to hang on to open space in the urban core. And I will be really specific, and one that is near and dear to my heart. I'd like to see your committee also offer some thoughts on tree removal, that as we are infilling places that we think of as in San Ramon as really being very park-like, very picturesque, happen to have an office building, and then all of a sudden, there's clear cutting happening. So I would encourage your committee to use what you have to get behind the idea that our urban forestation needs to be preserved as well. And I think the citizens also think that as well. And I would like to also just say that I have some concerns. I mean, I support the access issue. You and I, we go way back in our hiking fondness. It's how we met. But one of the things that I see as a pressure point is, as we are approving more and more dense situations, and there are more private streets, and we're getting pressure from state laws to reduce our parking requirements, that the number of people is going up, available street parking is going way down, and that's going to impact trailheads. For example, I mean, it's not in San Ramon, but Elworthy, there's one little spot on the street you could access those trails. So yes, you can get to the trails, but you have no place to put your car when you get to that trail. So as we go forward, that is a concern. And if that can be something that you also think about and remind people to worry about. And I understand the Bollinger Canyon natives, the residents are concerned. And part of it is they're putting in another trailhead, and they're concerned about the parking and people driving. So those are the two areas that, as you go forward with this plan, I know you had so many things that you've covered, but those would be the two that I would ask you to see if as you're going forward, you can slip in a little something.
We've been looking at this, we tackle the big problem was protecting the remaining open space. And we focused on that last year in our annual work plan. This year, we have an item in there to begin looking into developing an inventory of open space in the city, and not just the areas that are owned by the city and the GADs and with the conservation easements, but all those little tiny parks, those little areas that are not developed, the stream, the areas along the streams and so forth, and they're all over the city. Trying to maintain those open spaces so that they're available, and the homeowners association areas. I mean, a lot of those, you drive along El Costa Boulevard, and you've got several big areas there that sweep up to the ridge line, which are homeowners owner associations, but just identify those, who owns them, and which says something about the rights, but you just have a sense as to how much of it is there and how it's distributed. So, we're going to get into looking at that in terms of tree removals. I'm a tree person, forester by training and inclination, and I hate to see them the trees cut down. If there's a way of maintaining those. And I think there's a lot of research that's showing the importance of people being able to get a green fix close to home. It's good for their mental health and whatnot. So we need to build that into the city as we become more dense. And And again, that's something I think that the Open Space Committee can begin to look at, as we get past that protection effort
Right.
for these peripheral areas.
Sure.
We can begin to look at it. The access to the trails is going to continue to be an issue. The trouble with trailheads, it's like roads, there's a circularity of demand there, where you enlarge a road because you've got a lot of traffic, and then a few years later, you've got so much more traffic that you've got to enlarge it again. And as we approach this, if we can look at it from the point of view of how can we provide this access without necessarily having to pave everything over to create parking for the trailheads. We've talked a little bit about that, and I've thought about it a little bit. And again, that's something that we can begin to look at in the future as this is not a one-off, and we're going to continue to be there and continue to identify problems and issues. Sure. and suggest solutions as we go forward. So.
Well, thank you all very much. This is great feedback, and glad we got the recordings, and we'll go and put all this together and clarify some of the language and include a lot of things that you've talked with us about tonight. So appreciate the input very much.
Well, and
Very
thank
helpful.
you. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Yes, excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on to item 13.2, the Planning Commission year in review, fiscal year 2021-22.
Actually, before that, Chair Kuznick, I would prefer to run with our nomination of officers,
Okay.
and then we'll move on, because that is kind of your swan song
Oh,
of the year.
okay, very good. Excellent. All right. So,
I will be taking over the meeting for a brief moment. It's my one time a year I get to chair the commission for a whole 30 seconds.
I'm not giving up the gavel yet.
There you go. So at this point in time, the floor is now open for nominations for the Planning Commission Chair for 22-23.
Madam Chair, I nominate Commissioner Albert.
I'd like to second that nomination.
So we have first and a second on the floor. Can we all then vote on the iPads, please?
Okay. If I can figure out how to do this.
I can take roll call vote as well.
I don't see.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Yeah. I've not mastered the software.
Mover Marks,
Okay.
Commissioner Marks.
Aye.
Did Commissioner Edwards second? Kuznick, okay. Chair Kuznick,
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards,
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Albert.
Aye.
Congratulations, Chair Albert. And the next on our agenda is the nomination open for Vice Chair of the Planning Commission.
I'd like to propose that we nominate Commissioner Edwards as Vice Chair.
I'll second that.
If I hit this any harder, it's going
I
to
know.
break.
I'm gonna punch a hole right in it.
I can't figure it out.
I'll just take roll call vote. Mover, Vice or Commissioner Albert,
Aye.
Seconder, Commissioner Wallace,
Aye.
Commissioner Edwards, Commissioner Marks,
Aye.
and Chair Kuznick.
Yes. Not chair.
Congratulations, Vice Chair Corey Edwards. Welcome. And so, as we do every year, city staff likes to express our gratitude to our former Chair Kuznick for her year of service in the virtual world, which is unusual for this past year. You did a fantastic job guiding us through all the Zoom meetings and keeping us on track and on task. And so on behalf of the city of San Ramon, we have a plaque for your year of service. I can get up. I'm not sticking to my chair.
Wow. I was gonna get wine.
To present to you. Thank you. you very much from all the city staff for your year of service as chair.
Well, thank you so much. This is really quite unexpected.
Thank you. And then in a few minutes, Lauren Barr will be going through your review of everything that you accomplished. So
Well, thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you so much. And you guys all made me look good, so thank you. Really appreciate your.
Would any of the fellow commissioners like to say a few words at this point? Commissioner Wallace.
Ms. Chamberlain made a very good point. It's one thing to chair a meeting in public. It's a much tougher job when you're zooming it. It's like herding cats because you really don't have the control you have over it that you do at a public meeting. The balancing act in running a public meeting is being firm enough to move the things along, but light enough that the people who are here, particularly the members of the public who don't talk at these meetings on a regular basis, feel that their thoughts and their opinions have been respected. Respected doesn't mean you agree with them. Respect means you listen to them and pay attention to what they say and make a value judgment as to whether or not to agree with them or not, and to explain why you've reached a decision the way you have. And in the very difficult circumstances of the Zoom meetings, I thought that you have done a wonderful job of making members of the public feel comfortable in speaking before us in the decisions that they have offered themselves up to render an opinion on. And on behalf of not only my fellow commissioners, but as a member of the public of San Ramon, I want to thank you for making everybody feel that their thoughts counted when they came in front of the Planning Commission. And lastly, while I will miss you as chair, I'm glad you're sticking around for the hard work.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really, that's very sweet. Thank you. Thank you.
You don't have to.
Sure. I just want to acknowledge you. Last year was my first year as planning commissioner. Zoom was my natural environment. I was very happy with the way that you were running the meetings, and I agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Wallace's comments about making people feel listened to. We had a few kind of contentious issues that we dealt with this year, and I think that you did an excellent job of making people feel listened to. So thank you.
Thank you. It's really nice.
Gene, I will only echo what Eric said and add that you grew over the year. Your confidence, your growing confidence was obvious. Your ability to shrug off minor errors improved to the point that you became obviously more comfortable with the position. And I think that you are, in fact, a far better chair than you give yourself credit for. And you should keep that in mind, because when the next go around or two comes up, I think you should become the chair again and resume what you have already started. And I thank you for being just very patient during the year. I know that it was a good thing we were Zooming at home, because the grinding of my teeth or the things that I threw at the dog probably wouldn't have done well in public here.
Thank you. That's very nice. That's very nice.
And I get to speak last. And so, Gene, I would have not a lot more to add, but and you use this word more than once. What I appreciate about what you brought to the commission, and you've used this phrase exactly, out of the box thinking. And I think that was very much appreciated, because sometimes out of the box thinking becomes great ideas and great thinking. And I think as chair, you didn't just facilitate the meeting, you were an active participant and you brought ideas to the commission. And that's very much appreciated. I also have the pleasure of serving with Gene on the ad hoc committee where we interview potential candidates, and your personality and ability to make people feel comfortable is really evident there, because these are people that might be just applying to a committee for the very first time. And, anytime you hear the word interview, it feels like a pass-fail test. And, you're warm welcome to people. And one of my favorite phrases that you say all the time, there's no such thing as the wrong answer. It's just your answer. And you tell people and remind people that. And I think that's a fabulous, comment to make. And I've adopted that in my own mind. So thank you for that, Jean. And the commission decided one of the things that you like to do is you like to spend time outdoors. And so we have given you a gift certificate to Sports Basement. And I thought of something. There is one rule, on how you can spend it. You have to spend it on yourself or Tom, but you cannot spend it for your Boy Scout troop of girls, and you can't spend it on your kids. You have to treat yourself. So we hope you come up with something really good. And thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure to work with all of you. I appreciate the growth in many ways. And you guys, you're a great team to work with, and I really appreciate it. Zoom, I guess, was, manageable. So that was okay. I will definitely use this for something. We were just at Sports Basement yesterday. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to another year working with you. And then we'll see what path takes me as our term is going along. But I've learned a lot this year. And really great working with staff, a lot of interesting projects I know we're going to hear about. So thank you. And to all the citizens of San Ramon, we all take this job really seriously, and we do feel like it's really, really important that we listen to you and that we represent you, and that we are all take every one of these meetings trying to do what's best for all of us who live here, who live and work here. So thank you.
Madam Chair, before we move on to the next item, we do have a public comment in the audience. If you'd like to open public comment.
Why don't we go ahead and open public comment?
We're going to have call-in user 1 speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I logged in about 7 minutes late, and I see that you have gone away from the agenda order. The special items of nomination should have taken place at the beginning, I believe, because it was item number 4. So I'm glad that I actually didn't miss it, because I really do want to give my appreciation to Chair Kuznick. Her voice shows that she was a former teacher all the way, 100%. I could always hear the compassion, the attention. She is always making sure every single one of us is heard, I'm sure, like her students. And I just want you to know that you will be sorely missed by me. Your voice is extremely comforting over the Zoom. And I have actually witnessed you in physical meetings as well, because you came on during Mayor Clarkson's time. And I've also witnessed your demeanor is comfortable and reflective of your voice quality, just the same, graceful, attentive, and extremely compassionate. I really appreciate you. I'm glad that you will be staying around, because the agenda says that you are outgoing. I was really concerned that we're going to be losing a great citizen and an extremely competent official like you. The next comment is about Vice Chair that just got elected, Mrs. Edwards. She is extremely self-confident in her tone of voice and in her opinion. I hope that she will be able to take on a little bit more from Chair Kuznick, and where her lawyer personality, can possibly be held back a little bit and become more compassionate like a teacher. I hope that you will try. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other hands raised?
We do have one more hand raised.
Okay.
Joyce Carr.
Okay. Hi, Joyce.
Hi, Oh, I'm glad I have an opportunity to speak. I didn't know whether you were going to have public comment or not, but as the members of the commission were speaking about Jean, I was sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, that's exactly the way she comes across to me. Whenever I've spoken, Jean, you've always been so kind and thanked me at the end in a real honest way, just being so nice. And I want to thank you for being that way. I don't know that we've ever met in person because I haven't been to a meeting in person for a long, long time, but I hope that we will meet sometime. And congratulations on a wonderful job. And thank you for your kindness.
Thank you, Joyce. Any other hands raised? No. Okay, we can go ahead and move on. At this time, we have a year in review, and led by Lauren Barr.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to present the year in review once again. One thing I'll say is it's when we assemble these presentations, it's always impressive how much we accomplish in 1 year with this commission. And I would also add that these slides and representations of projects don't tell the whole story. Many of these projects were multiple hearings with a lot of feedback from the public and a lot of deliberation on the part of the commission. But in any event, I will walk through the 21-22 term year in review. So one of the early projects this year was the Ttlc Townhome project in the San Ramon Village specific plan. This was 500 Deerwood Road. This was actually our first SB 330 application that we processed. And so there was some learning curve there and some design issues that we all worked through. It has been approved and they're actually in plan check right now, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Oops, wrong way. Sandbox VR, the virtual reality group that went into City Center. Again, that was a use permit, not much in the way of site development, but it was contentious nonetheless. There was an appeal. It went to council and was ultimately approved in October of 2021. And then, of course, there was the City Village plan. Many hearings as part of this effort, including the specific plan amendment as well as entitlements. And so the 404 unit project was ultimately approved in November of 2021. We did several concept reviews during this period as well. 2481 Deerwood Drive, this was townhomes, 61 units on roughly 4.4 acres. And we'll have another slide in a little bit to talk about where they've gone since that concept review, but you provided them good direction and they took it to heart. Likewise, we had a proposal for townhomes on Morgan's Masonry site. And that one did not go forward as proposed, but it was there were some interesting comments from the commission, concerns about density and overall vision of the plan. And again, the commission provided good feedback and the developer made a decision on how to proceed. In this case, they did not proceed. Belmont Village Senior Care. This was originally a concept review from before, but it came through for entitlements. And so this is something that has been approved. We anticipate building permits this fall. And so we'll kind of touch on that. But this was approved back in November of 2021. We also had another SB 330 project, Windflower Townhomes on Golden Skate site. As you recall, there was a lot of discussion regarding junior ADUs and the application of them as affordable units in this particular situation, given the regulatory environment. But with a lot of work and a lot of hearings, it was ultimately approved in December of 2021. We also did another concept review for townhomes on the Rome project site or San Ramon Village project site. And again, feedback was provided and they ultimately did not pursue this alternative. We had the walking district. A lot of effort went in between multiple committees and it was brought before the Planning Commission for feedback and direction that ultimately went to the council and approved in February of 2022. And again, this is something that will have long-term impacts on the core of the city. We did another concept review for the first part of the Citywalk Master Plan, which is the BR1A apartment project concept review. Again, you provided feedback, and they took that feedback to heart, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the future as well. As in every year, we do a general plan annual report, a summary of implementation status of the general plan, and that was forwarded on to council and ultimately the state. We also had a concept review related to the previously approved Hampton Inn project. We were looking at revisions to their parking structure for surface lot and subterranean parking. They were provided comments on how to proceed, and we've been in conversations with them regarding potential submittal of revisions to that project. Now, this slide doesn't go nearly far enough to explain the amount of effort that went into this, but of course the general plan update and the ad hoc committee efforts have been taking a lot of time over the last 6 months, and the commission has been very much involved in the process and public outreach process for this effort, and will continue on this effort through the next 6 to 9 months. Just back in May, we did a extension to the Chang development project. This was sort of involved the LAFCO extension of the annexation, and so they needed some additional time. And so the commission approved an extension back in May. And so this is still a valid entitlement, has not moved forward into development permits yet. And then we also had City Village BR6 map revisions that you approved in May. Also multiple hearings for the El Nido Assisted Living project over on the west side. And that project was approved in May of 2022 as well. We had Primrose Daycare, several hearings for that as well. And again, approved in May of 2022. We did the first hearing related to the formal applications on the 2481 Deerwood Drive Townhome project, where we're looking at a change from office to residential and open space as the design alternative. And so we're working through that process now, and they'll be coming back this fall for additional hearings and environmental review. We did another concept review for the Morgan's Masonry site by Anton Development. This was a 100% affordable development project. Once again, a lot of meaningful feedback provided by the commission, and the applicant took that and is considering their options at this point. Okay, in terms of projects that are currently under review, we now have a formal application for the Citywalk BR1A apartment project. This is a view of a rendering from the Iron Horse Trail overcrossing looking to the south. And it's actually been revised a little bit from the statistics that are here. It's 381 units now, slightly smaller in terms of the parking spaces as well. But that's going to be working its way through this fall. We're going to Architectural Review Board on Thursday with this one. We have another SB 330 application filed for Iron Horse Village, and that's at the corner of Alcosta and Crow Canyon Road. And this is demolishing the Neron property where PG&E used to have offices, and they're looking at 117 units. And it's a combination of small lot, single family, as well as basically a combination of the small lot, single family, and multifamily townhome style. And then, of course, we've had the Marketplace SB 330 application, which most of you are aware of. Many of you, the public's aware of as well. This is the second version of that particular project. Originally, there was an apartment concept that was floated, and then it was since revised into a townhome concept, as well as a renovation of the Starbucks site to the east. And that's working its way through the review process right now. So projects that are actually under construction right now. City Village, you've seen the demolition and the grading activities, and they're moving right along. The EOC building at 2401, that's in addition to the renovations to the safety building for police and fire. I would also tag on to that. We also have the training facility at Bollinger and Crow Canyon Road. Obviously, they need to be able to relocate their administrative offices before they can start redeveloping that particular site. And then we're talking with them about some revisions to some of the training, not sure what they're called, this training apparatus that they have there, for lack of a better word. In any case, this project continues to move forward. We have Camp Bow Wow. Permits have been issued, under construction. Neighborhood 5, Promenade at the Preserve, also under construction, as well as the Preserve proper, Faria Preserve, also known as, still underway. And then these again are projects that are in process. As I mentioned, the Ttlc is in plan check for building permits right now. We would anticipate sometime later this fall that they should be ready. They have a lot of upfront work to do in terms of affordable housing and as well as technical studies to do. Same thing with Windflower Townhomes. We've had some discussions with them about, permit requirements. They haven't specifically indicated when they might come in, but they're definitely working toward permit issuance. Aspen Woods Senior Apartments. That's one that's been around for a while, and there's been a lot of activity with the city council in terms of funding and getting that project going as a 100% affordable project. So it's moving forward. And when we're done here, if Debbie would like to give an update on that, she's more than welcome to. And then Belmont Village, as I mentioned, we've been talking with them about getting into permits this fall. And then San Ramon Valley Apartments, they're still active in terms of their entitlements and their permit pursuit. They're working on some funding ideas to close the funding gap that they have. So we're continuing to talk with them about options. As I mentioned, Hampton Inn, we've been talking to them about some revisions to their structures. And so we'll see if they come back in with some revisions to development plan amendment. And then City Center Hotel is vested with development agreements. It's been delayed, but it's still an active project. And we anticipate when the economy gets to a point that makes sense for them, they'll pull the trigger on that and get going. Same with the Chang residential development. We just granted some extensions. I know they've had discussions with the resource agencies over some of the requirements there. And so we're continuing to monitor this one and be available to help them with the process and get them in. But we don't have a specific timeline for this. And then lastly, not on the list, but I'll mention it, is the Bridges Golf Course. They currently are in the process of their solar installations on their parking lots. They have not pulled permits on any of the renovations, but we do continue to coordinate with them regarding event planning and coordinating with the police on complaints and issues there. And so we'll continue that dialogue and trying to resolve those issues as they come up. And so that's really all I have right now. It's again a busy year, and like I said, it doesn't reflect the amount of effort that goes into each one of these slides. If there's any questions or other updates that people would like, I'd be happy to answer.
Mr. Chair, I just simply want to say that as much as the Planning Commission has done on these projects, there's a tremendous amount of backstory staff work that goes on these. We are the beneficiary of the staff reports. And even though There are times when it feels like we are reading an awful lot. It takes an awful lot of time to write what we are reading, to write it in a way that is compliant with the law, compliant with our plans. And while I may disagree with staff from time to time, I do appreciate the amount of work that goes into this, and the amount of probably overtime, Saturday work, late night work to try and meet deadlines, to say nothing of the endless number of meetings with applicants that is required. So we have had a good year, but in very large part, that is due to the staff. And I think we should recognize that.
Other comments? No, just thank you, Lauren, for that. And our action is just to accept the report. And I think we all agree with Commissioner Marks that, we're the tip of the iceberg is all we see. And the, 6/7 of the work is stuff that we never, ever will see. And just to echo all the good work. And thank you so much for everything you do to make us be able to do what we do. So thank you again, Lauren and Debbie, and in the audience, Cindy and Ryan. Thank you. Well, an iceberg, you see 1/7 above the surface and 6/7 is below.
Mr. Chair, we have one public comment if we would like to take it. Call-in user 1.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Barr for an extremely thorough and detailed presentation. And in the beginning, he mentioned Sandbox VR, which brought me back to some unpleasant memories of all of the very careful deliberations that this commission has taken in past years. And in this particular past year, I felt Sandbox VR was really an anomaly where the commissioners only spent one meeting, less than 15 minutes, to consider this out of ordinary project. Please be reminded that you guys had to actually bend the rules and stretch an old law to allow Sandbox VR to operate, notwithstanding fighting against a big shark like Sunset Development. A nobody me lost $2,500 when the city council decided in their favor, and you guys never refunded me the money, which is to this day, I resent that. And I hope the planning department will please take that into consideration, that if it's your, or not yours, but necessarily, but when the city doesn't do its fiduciary duty in properly vetting new businesses, especially brand new businesses that the old laws were never written to regulate, that your job is to create new laws through policy, be admitted into our ordinance instead of stretching an old law, then therefore baiting and inviting a nobody resident like me to fight for everyone. At the time, I was really concerned about transmission of the COVID virus, but in doing public good, I lost $2,500 of my good money. So I will look forward to see that recorded by the Finance Committee in the next year's report. I want to see that properly reflected. I have contributed $2,500 to the mistake and anomaly of this commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other hands raised? Okay, we'll go ahead and accept the presentation, and thank you, Lauren. At this time, are there any commissioner liaison reports? No? Commissioner Wallace.
Okay, so Commissioner Marks and I attended the first super ad hoc committee meeting last week on the general plan. And the subject matter of that was the definition of mixed use. We talked about it. We did not come up with the definition. There was one that was put on the table sort of as a default. Let's start someplace. We are going to have another meeting. I don't think we have a date certain yet. I believe it will be towards the end of July, at which time I believe that staff will come back with some ideas for definitions, maybe plural for mixed use, as the consultant mentioned. There's nothing that prohibits us from having mixed use in different areas with different definitions. And I suspect that some members of the ad hoc committee may bring forward their own ideas about how we define mixed use so that we can move the ball along, because as you know, a large percentage of the housing opportunity sites that have been submitted to HCD for its deliberation are in areas that are either A, mixed use now, or B, will have to be rezoned to be mixed use. And we want to make sure that in doing this whole process that we preserve the commercial aspect of mixed use and not make all apartment buildings. So that's the report for the super ad hoc committee. And maybe Commissioner Marks wants to add a few PG-13 comments.
Okay. Okay. I attended EDAC a couple of weeks ago, and it was a review of the retail study that we looked at. And the committee provided a number of comments back to staff. And then I attended an ARB meeting. And as you recall, we asked Primrose to come back with some additional changes, not for us, but for ARB review. And they did that at that meeting. And those were my two. Lauren, coming attractions.
The next meeting date we have is July 19th. We're going to have economic and retail analysis for the general plan 2040. So there'll be a presentation and additional discussion on that study and direction moving forward with that. In addition, the Housing Advisory Ad Hoc Committee is working to put together some times to do interviews for those positions. And so we'll continue to coordinate that, as well as the super ad hoc committee toward the end of the month. We'll finalize some dates.
Great. Thank you. If there's no other comments, we can go ahead and adjourn at 9:22 p.m.